So this is the hand sample that hand sewn sample that we're gonna make. So what I want you to do first is, say this is your fabric, I want you to make a big long box pleat, 20 by 30 centimeters for the final length of it. So if you look at it, it's a box pleat, and you'll end up with a sample like this. And what I want you to do is, so you can see the, so firstly I would like, I know you won't all have all of these fastenings. So you have here, you have a trouser hook, you have a skirt hook, military hook and eye, corset hook and eye, and a hook and loop, hook and bar. This is a hand worked eyelet and a buttonhole eyelet and a press fastening and a covered press fastening, a button and a button loop, a button bar and a swing catch. Once you've done them for how many you've got, whatever you can find, then you can do your hand stitching. These are laying on the front because so that they're visible basically, but you would do your hook, this hook would be underneath and the bar would be, so you would hook over to the bar. So relevant to whichever one you're using. The corset hook and bar sit like this on a tutu. When you're using it for a tutu, they sit in this, on top like this. So once you've done all your fastenings, you buttonholed them lovely, then you can go on to your hand stitching. So here is just a straight stitch, a prick stitch, a herringbone stitch, and then on this side I've just done a straight stitch again to hold these down, a back stitch and a chevron stitch. There's other stitches, if you feel like doing it, you can carry on. So if you made your sample wider, you could carry on doing more stitches. So that's up to you. So that's how we're going to start it. So in the next step, I'm going to go through each stitch and show you how they're done. So the sample that you're making, sorry, I forgot to say, you're making a box pleat, but with a gap. So that's about 2 centimeter gap, 1.5, 2 is plenty. Yep. Right, so the next we're going to do, I'm going to demonstrate doing a running stitch, a back stitch, and then a combination of the two. You just need to do for your sample, you can do the running stitch and the back stitch, and if you want you can do the combination, but that's optional. So you've got your thread and your needle. Little trick to thread your needle is lick the eye of your needle and then thread it, and the saliva seems to attract the thread to go into the needle. You can wax your thread. Make sure you use a real beeswax, not a mix like a cheaper version. It needs to be real, otherwise sometimes it stains. And always do a test that if you put too much on, it can gather on the top of your fabric. If you use proper beeswax, you won't get that happening. And just lightly run it through, and this helps. Just run your fingers through a couple of times, and this helps stops it knotting as well. So the first stitch I'm going to do is a running stitch, and I like to just do a couple of little tiny stitches for my knot, depending if something's going to be visible laying on top close to the performer's body. You don't want a big thick ugly knot. Do a couple of tight stitches, they lay flat. And then a running stitch is just literally in, out, in, out. You can do little runs of 3 or 4 depending on the length of your needle, and try and keep them even. In, out, in, out. And if you find that your needle is causing big holes, your needle's too big for your fabric. Or if you're struggling to feed your needle in, again, it's too big. So you need to use the appropriate size. So for silk, you want a fine needle. Something heavy, you would have a heavier needle. And then again, when you finish off, a couple of little tiny tight stitches, and if you've got a couple of layers, you can go off and bury, just go off into the layers like that, and bury your thread. And snip it off and you won't see it. So the next, I'm going to do a knot. To show you how to do a knot, you roll it round your finger and then just roll it forward. And use your nail and tighten, and you get a knot. So you can see the size of the knot, and that can irritate people sometimes. So if it's between layers, you can hide it. So back stitch I'm starting. And where my thread comes out, I want to go half a stitch behind and half a stitch forward. And then next one, I'll go just before. Half a stitch behind, half in front. So you're just going to the beginning of the previous stitch, that's your half stitch behind, and going forward. And just keep going. This is a really strong stitch. And if you're doing something like for reenactment or something, then you're literally doing everything by hand authentically. This is a good strong stitch for your seams. Try to keep them even. It nearly looks like a machine stitch when you get going. So the next stitch is a combination of these two. So if you've got a lot of hand stitching to do, to speed things up, you can start with a little small back stitch, do a running stitch, 3 or 4, I'm just going to do 3, back stitch again, 3 or 4, and that will give you speed, plus if it starts coming undone where the back stitch is, it will lock it, and so the whole thing won't unravel if the threads break. So that's a combination of the two. It's a running back stitch. And then again you can just finish off a couple of tight stitches and bury your thread in the layers come out elsewhere and snip off. So that's your 3 stitches. A running stitch, a back stitch. The back of the back stitch will look like that. So it's like a continual line. And then the combination of the two is a little back stitch, 3 running stitches, a little back stitch, 3 running, and carry on doing that. So you've done the straight stitch, back stitch, run and back stitch. Now I'm going to do a prick stitch. Let's run my thread through the wax. A prick stitch is similar to a back stitch. So I'm just going to start off a couple of little tight stitches. And I'm going to go under and along like I did on the back stitch. But this time when I do the back stitch, I'm going to go back, but I'm literally going to do like 1-2 threads at the most in the fabric, so you can barely see it. Come along underneath, however far you want them apart. And it's just a tiny, tiny back stitch. So back stitch. So again, working right to left, if you're left-handed, left to right. And if you look at my fabric here to help me keep a straight line, I've just finger pressed a crease. So it's given me something to follow, but it's not a drawn line, so it won't look a mess. Or you could follow the grain of the fabric, but it's a little bit harder, especially when you first start out. So a little tiny back stitch. So you're just seeing a little prick mark of the thread, and if you look underneath, you got to continue a line. Yeah. So carry on, and again, don't pull too hard, dragging the thread so you end up with really deep pucker marks. Just want it to look nice, delicate, not too tight. And when you're sewing, keep your work in front of you and keep your hands in a relaxed position. If you start doing this and then trying to do that, your hands not in a comfortable position. It makes it more awkward, and your hands will tire, your wrists will get sore. So keep it in front of you, horizontally, depending on what you're doing, and don't fight. If you're fighting to do it in an awkward angle, you're not doing it right. It's got to be comfortable because you're going to be doing a lot of it, so you need to be comfortable and not damage your wrists or anything. And then again at the end I just do a couple of tight little stitches somewhere discreet, and then bury my thread in layers if I had layers, and cut off. So that's prick stitch. And that's the back of it. So my next stitch is going to be a herringbone stitch. So for this one I'm going to make a knot. Wrap it round, twist it, and then just pull it. And for a herringbone stitch, you're going to work, if you're right-handed, left to right, and vice versa if you're left-handed. So for this, I'm putting my needle in the fold, That's why I've made a knot, because it'll be hid within the fold. And then I'm going to do a back stitch. So do a small back stitch. So this is the body of the garment, this is the hem. So 2-inch hem. And I'll do a small back stitch, just taking a couple of fibers, no more than 2. Back stitch, and then I'll go down and forward evenly, sort of 1/2 inch back stitch. Your back stitch in here, because it won't be seen, can be a little bit bigger. And then back up, going forward in a zigzag, the same distance, about 1/2 inch. Couple of fibers, back stitch, and then back down. So keep your stitches evenly, don't pull them too tight. Back stitch. So when you back stitch, and it kind of locks it at each point. Back stitch again. And don't make them too big or don't make them too tiny. If you make them too tiny, you're going to be out there all day long. Just concentrate on keeping them even, and you'll get quicker as you go along. So if you look at the front of the garment, you can see the tiny little plucks here and there. If they were the same color, you wouldn't see the thread at all, if it was the same color as the body of the garment. What you don't want to do is, I pulled it too tight, so if I pull it too tight like that, when you turn it around, you can see a pucker in the fabric. That's what you don't want to happen. So keep it delicate and a little bit, not too loose, but loose enough that it's not pulling the fabric at the front. See the way my thread knotted a little bit then? Because I didn't wax it. And it, yeah, back stitch. And then on this, I would, my final one, I would go into the hem itself, do a couple of little tight stitches, and then I'd bury my thread within the fold, come out in a different area, and then clip, and you don't see, it just disappears. And that's your herringbone stitch. So this next one is going to be a slip stitch. So I'm going to do a knot for this so that I can hide it in the fold. So I've got my hem. I press this edge. This folded edge, I'm just going to finger press. Because what happens if you do a hard ironed edge, it makes it difficult to slide your needle into the crease and it slows you down. So I found if you finger press that one, it makes it, you can stitch a bit faster, and then you can press it after the fact. So I'm gonna put my knot behind the crease, and then I'm gonna pick up just 1 or 2 fibers. Then I'll go back up where I come out, run along the crease about 1/2 inch, come down and prick my, you can feel it, you prick your finger and then rock it, and you'll just pick up 1 or 2 threads. Go back up where you come out. Down my finger, roll it, and you'll just pick up 1 or 2 fibers. Back up in the crease. Just push your needle along the crease, you can feel it, and then just push down and prick stitch. So you can see you're just picking up on this body 1 or 2 fibers. Back where you come out, along, down, rock. And then if you look at the other side, you barely see it. A little pluck mark, and if it was in the same color, you wouldn't see it. You can also, I prefer what I just showed you. I go up right where I come out so you don't see a stitch, but some people go slightly forward. So either or is fine. Go forward, along, pick up 1 or 2 threads. Slightly forward, along, rock it, 1 or 2 threads, and this way you get just a very slight little diagonal stitch. So either way is fine. I prefer the previous way because you don't see anything. Oh, I forgot to go forward there. Habit. And you see the diagonal stitch there versus you don't see any. So if that was in the same color, you wouldn't notice it. Forward again. I guess the one little advantage that would give you, because you're going forward, it would get you along just that little bit quicker. So, and then I finish off with a couple little stitches in the hem itself. Tiny tight stitches. Bury my thread between the fibers, the layers. Come out. And clip. So that's your slip stitch. And again, don't pull too tight or you get little pluck marks too. Just keep it delicate. Okay, this stitch is a chevron stitch. It's used for tailoring. So you just do a stitch across, and you can see it comes on the diagonal. So if you do a line going down doing that, and then go across to the other side, and go back up the other way. So you'll come to the point now. So this is creating a chevron. This is used in tailoring as it's called a pad stitch. And it's to hold the layers together for your lapels and collar. And it helps you roll the lapels and collars so they don't poke out. So when you're actually doing it, you will hold it on a curve. So, when you're doing tailoring, you would skim through the layers, and on the other side you would just see like a prick mark. You wouldn't actually go right through. But for this stitch on your sample, it doesn't matter if you go right through, don't worry about it. The stitch can also be used for basting. So there's your chevron. That one's a bit skewer, but so that's what it should look like. If you're basting your layers of fabrics together, so you've got a couple of layers, 3 layers, and you don't want them to shift, you baste this. It's the same stitch, just a large chevron. and you can just do it the one way, all the way along. You just do big stitches like that. You don't want to do a lot of tiny little stitches because you'll end up quilting your fabric up. So just big loose stitches like that, and then carry on spaced, and that will hold your layers together so they don't shift as you're sewing your bodice or whatever you're doing together. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to do a buttonhole stitch. And for buttonhole stitch you need a double thread. And do you remember how I showed you to double your thread and then put the 2 raw ends into the eye of a needle? That way you've got a loop at the end that you can do a nice little clean neat knot, and your needle can pivot so you won't get a weak point here. So I just used a big needle with a big eye so I could see. I'm going to go to a smaller needle that I've threaded prior. So your hook, when you're doing a hook, you would put it under and just put it just behind the edge. But for this exercise, so that it's visible, we're going to put it on the other side so you can see it along the top. So if you look at this, I want them to sit all along the top. So first, I position it. And I go under and in under the loop, pull my thread out and go through the loop there. So got a nice neat knot. Go back under, through, under the loop, tighten in a knot, under the loop, under, tighten in a knot. So when you tighten in your knots, keep them at the same angle all the time when you're tightening. So under the eye, under the loop, tighten at the same angle. Under the eye, under the loop, tighten at the same angle. If you've got time you can do right round, but if you do 4 or 5 that's usually plenty. And then sink your needle between the layers and come out into the other eye. That way you don't got a big ugly thread sitting across. And do the same thing. Tighten. So I'll just do a few quickly. Tighten, same angles. So now I've got enough knots holding it. I don't want my fastening to flip back and forth, so I need to secure that down. So again, I'll go between the layers. I'll come out near where it is. And I'm just going to do a couple stitches to secure that down. They're just over stitches. Because this is a double thread, doing it twice, that's give you 4 threads to hold it down. That should be plenty. And then just a couple of tight stitches. So you can see the end of my thread here. I can just pull my thread along now and change the position. And then just go through between the layers again and come out somewhere. And then you can trim your knot and you don't have a big ugly knot sitting there beside it. Yeah, and then it's secure, it's not flipping back and forth. On your layers of fabric, you need to make sure it's secured down. But on the back of it, you probably just have that little stitch showing there. These I would keep in between the layers. So you're not going to go right through to the front each time, because you don't want to see all that ugly stitch in there. And that's your hook. So the next one, I'm going to do the loop, and I'll put the loop just peeping there. So pick it up. Position it. And again, going through. So my buttonhole stitch, I learned from a left-handed person, and I do it left-handed with my right hand. So coming under, tightening. So I'll do this side my way. I find it's much easier. And then when I go to the other side, I'll show you the other way. So going between the layers, coming out the other one. And I'll just get it going. I forgot to loop it then. So the correct way, the book way, which is the diagram that I've shown you on the PowerPoint, is they loop around like this and then come through. Loop around like that and come through. Loop around under the eye. And again, tighten your knots at the same angles. I don't feel like when I do it that way it's as neat. So it doesn't matter how you do it. Whatever gets you that way. So I've got my 4 stitches. And then again, I don't want this flapping back and forth, so I'll bury it in between the layers. And then come out near the eye, and so it's a little bit skewy. I'll just a couple of stitches to hold it down. And then I've come through the layers again. And same on the other side. Two stitches gives you 4 threads. And then just knot off. Tiny stitch, 1 or 2 is plenty. And then just go between the layers. And cut your thread. Make sure you use a new thread each time so that you got the loop to start off with. So it should look, you can see that closer. This is the loop, that's the hook. So the next fastening that I'm going to do is a bar. So you can use either of these, it's your choice. A bar I would use when I was up, this is the back of a bodice, the placket. I would position my bars right close to the edge, yeah. And then this is slightly back, so when it hooks in, it brings the fabric and the center back line should meet. So, oops. So again, you're just do it on the top so it's visible. And through the eye. through the loop, under the loop, under the eye, under the loop, under the eye, under the loop. And then again, I've just done 4. I'll go between the layers, come out, position it, and start again. So under the eye, under the loop, and always tighten in the same angle. Because if you don't, if I start, I tighten up like this, or like this, and then one like that, they'll all be all over the place. So if I keep the angles tightened, I just tend to pull mine down, and it looks neat, and they all lay down neatly beside each other. Yeah, so you can see 4 nice neat little stitches. And then again, bury your thread, do a little tiny tight knot with just 1 or 2 threads. And then bury it, bring it out through the layers somewhere else. Then it looks neat, you got a neat finish. So the next one I'm going to do is a handmade loop. So here. So how I do that is I come to the edge, go through my loop on the end of my double thread, and I like to go between along the crease. And do a couple of stitches, 2 or 3, and pull them snug. Make sure they're the same length. So I've done 3. I bring my needle into it and I check they're even. And then I'm just going to start doing a buttonhole stitch on them. So under the loop, and again tighten at the same angles. Under the loop, and you can just bump them up so make sure they're snug, they're filling the whole length of the bar. Same angle, and use a little bit thicker thread for this. If you use a really thin, like Gutermann or that, it tends to be hard to get the knots to look neat. Yeah, and just keep going until you fill it all up. And you will do this exactly the same. Do a little tight knot to knot it off, and then bury it and come out somewhere else. And you have your loop. So So there's no need to leave it out like that, just bring it snug, because once you've done that and the tension on it, it goes out automatically. So that same method you're going to use for this was your loop, a bar tack, and same with the swing catch, which you do, it explains in the PowerPoint, swing catches for like on hems to skirts, or when you have them period men's frock coats, they'll have the swing catches between all the pleats to control them. So you would do the same thing, a few stitches back and forth, and then buttonhole. So them three are done exactly the same. So the swing catch you're going to do, I'll just show you how to do. You just go from one side to the other, and again do it. Make it strong, do it a few times. Make sure they're even, and then you can start doing your buttonhole stitch. So yeah, just carry on doing it just like you did there. And same with when you do the bar tack, just a couple of stitches through and then carry on doing. Your buttonhole stitch. Yeah. So yeah. So this is covering a popper. So I've got my popper here. I've cut out a disc, I've done a running stitch around it, and then I'll just pop it in with the front of it facing, and then tighten that around it. And then you would get your popper like that, and then you can just poke or press this top of the other side in to push the center in. So like that. And then pop it back out. And then you'd sew it on. So if you look at here, you're just going to sew it on as normal. Just do 3 or 4 at each point. So same buttonhole stitch that you've used on your hooks and bars. Yep. So the next one I'm going to do is a hand eyelet. I know you won't have an eyelet machine to do the ordinary ones, but you could do that at a later date. So you just make your normal eyelet and you do buttonhole stitch around. It looks lovely, but in reality the knots start twisting when it gets a lot of use. So it's up to you whether you do it or not. But what it does do, it secures the eyelet. So sometimes when you got too many thick layers, your eyelet might start coming away from the edges. So to do a hand one, you need an awl. There's a couple of awls. This one's a leather punch, but it would work. This is an awl, and you can see it goes from thin to thick. So when you push further down, it makes the hole bigger. If you don't have an awl, you don't cut the hole, You could use a fork. You want to pry the fibers away. So I'll show you as I start. So you put your through and then you work your way through. So you're pushing the fibers to the side. If you cut a hole, and keep going back and forth. So if you cut a hole, you'll just split and it won't work. So you just keep working back and forth till you get a decent sized hole. So once you've made your hole with your awl, you'll feel it's like a hard ridge around there. So we can start stitching around it now. So you're just going to do a whip stitch for this. And kind of space, give yourself space because you don't want to crowd the hole. So you're going to whip around. And tighten it up. And just carry on doing that. Yeah. Try and space it neatly, nice around, and then just carry on, and then just a couple little stitches and bury your thread again. And then once you've done it, you've got a finished one, just put your awl back in. So you can start off with a fork to make the hole if you don't have an awl. Just something pokey to start the hole and push the fibers apart. And then you can just put bigger things in, like knitting needles, something like that, just bigger, and then just work it. If you don't want to have something that's conal like this, you can just work it like that. Yeah, and then go back in after you've made it and do the same thing, and it feels like a hard ridge, and it feels like there's an eyelet in there, and it's quite sturdy. We've just done 2 layers on this, but when you come to do it for real, you usually will have a 3rd layer, but I would put a 3rd layer in and it'll make it more firmer. So I would just pop another layer in between if I don't have more than 2 layers, depending on what my fabric is. So you just take each garment at its own merit. If you feel like it's too thin, pop something else in there. And that's your hand stitch eyelet. So next I'm going to do how to sew a button on. So you have 2 types of buttons. You have flat ones, they usually have 2 holes or sometimes 4. And other buttons will have a built-in shank already. So sewing on normal button, double thread, go through my loop, and then I will put through my eye and back down the other eye and into the fabric. So to create, I don't want to pull this too tight against the body of the fabric. So if you got a little toothpick or another pin or something, helps. You can stitch around that, and that will stop you making it too tight against the fabric. And plus, if you do with on all of them, they'll be all sewn in exactly the same. So in, out, a few times, snugly. So this is double thread, so I've gone in 4 times. So that's 8 threads holding up. I think that's plenty. And then I'm going to come back under, take my little needle out, and I'm going to roll my thread around the base, creating a little shank. So the needles give me a little bit of space. That's created a little shank. And it's brought all the threads together so it looks neater, and then just do a couple of little tight stitches. And then bury your thread again between the layers and come out elsewhere. And cut it off. And there's your button. So it's got a nice little bit of space there, so when you come to button the other side over, there's room for it. So you might as well do a shanked one as well, because you're not going to be able to get all your eyelets and that, so it'll give you, but it's the same, it'll give you something to do. So same, start off. I've just noticed when I was burying my thread I come through the top, so ignore that please, blind as a bat. So just go through the shank. So this time you're just going to stitch through, and again just go through a few times. Try keep it neat underneath. 4 or 5 times would probably be enough. Okay, I've gone through 4 or 5 times. And make sure it's neat on the back, so you don't try go in the same space all the time. Same here, same on the flat one. And then again, just bring your thread around the base a couple of times. Not as many on the shank. It's just to hold all the threads together so they're not splayed out. And then a couple of tight stitches again. To knot it. Oops. And then bury your thread as usual between the layers. And this time don't have the thread showing. Yep. Clip it off. And there's your shank button.